Hey guys, so go ahead and download your reading for Blue Willow, and I'm not going to show you the pictures of it, but I'll read it aloud and you can follow along with me in your download, okay? So this is realistic fiction and it's called Blue Willow. And this first page just kind of gives you a quick summary of it. Janie's father worked in the fields picking crops. Her family, like those of many other migrant workers in the 1940s, must always move on to wherever workers are needed. The family takes only basic necessities with them, except for a blue willow plate that belonged to Janie's great-great-grandmother. To Janie, the plate is a reminder of the time when they had a home. When she discovers a place that reminds her of the picture on the plate and finds a friend, Lupe, she begins to hope that this time they will stay. Janie and Dad were on their way to the cotton fields. Dad was going to work. Janie was going to school. It was October now. The sun, though bright and warm, was not hot as it had been a month ago, and the mountains, as if rewarding the valley for milder weather, were allowing their blue outlines to be seen. Wild sunflowers turned bright faces to the east, and occasional dust devils went spiraling off across the plain in merry abandon. But Janie, huddled in a corner of the ragged front seat, was sulkily indifferent to the world around her. The corners of her mouth sagged, her lower lip protruded, as if in something close to a pout, and her eyes glowered darkly. She wasn't glad to be going to school. Not this school, at any rate. If only she were being taken to the town school, the one where Lupe and all the other children of the district went. That is, they did if they belonged to the district. Janie was well aware that actually she herself could have attended that school too. There was no law forbidding it, but it was a fact too that in some communities she would have been extremely unwelcome, and Dad, knowing this, had made his own law in respect to Janie. "We'll keep with our own kind," he had once said when she was remonstrated with him. "The camp schools are put there for us to use, and so we'll use them and be thankful. Besides, a body can learn anywhere, if he's a mind to." Janie hadn't argued further with him on that occasion, and she had no desire to do so today. She knew that going to the regular school would no longer satisfy her anyway, for just going there couldn't make her really belong. Since she had begun to want to stay in this place, merely going to the district school was no longer enough. What Janie wanted was to belong to this place and to go to the district school because as a member of the community, it was her right to go there. The camp school would now be a daily and forceful reminder of the fact that she didn't belong, and so she dreaded it. She knew what the camp school would be like. No two of the children would have learned the same things, and it would be a jumble. In some lessons, Janie would find herself way ahead of most of the boys and girls her age, and she would be expected as a matter of course to know other things she had never had a chance to learn. Most of the time, she wouldn't know whether she was going or coming, and there would be endless questions and much tiresome fussing. Besides, it was much too early in the day for school to start, and she would have to wait around until it did. She would have asked Dad to let her go into the field with him if she had thought it would do any good, but she knew from past experience that it wouldn't. Never had she been allowed to do any field work. Other children did, and sometimes Mom, but never Janie. Dad, so easygoing about most things, was firm on this. So Janie sat with a frown on her face as the old car jolted along its way and came very near to feeling sorry for herself. She would have known the schoolhouse as soon as they came in sight of it if Dad hadn't bothered to point it out. She had seen many of them before they had all looked alike. Some were newer than others, and that was about the only difference. This was one of the newer ones. It was rather a large square building, its unpainted boards gleaming in the bright light. In front of it, a flagpole, also unpainted, towered against the morning sky. As yet no flag was in evidence, so Janie knew for sure that school had not yet started. Her father let her off at the front steps, then drove over to park beside a row of cars that looked as if they might all have come from the same junk pile. Janie sat down to wait, her package of lunch beside her. Across from her were the cottages, row upon row, that comprised the camp. Looking at these little one-room sheds so close together that their eaves almost touched, she was thankful for her own shack and the spreading country around it. Of course, there was plenty of country spread around here, but the camp itself was squeezed into as small a space as possible so as not to use up any more of the cotton ground that was absolutely necessary. The deep green of the cotton plants reached in every direction almost as far as the eye could see, and here and there, against the green of every bush, a gleam of white showed clearly. That was where a cotton boll had burst open to free the fluffy fibers, which would be picked by hand from each boll. There would be thousands, perhaps millions of these little white bunches, and it would take many fingers working many hours a day to pick all the ripening cotton. That is why there was a village of little houses at this place with the schoolhouse at hand. During the picking season, hundreds of people lived here and worked here until the day should come when all of the cotton was harvested. Then they would load their cars with what household goods they owned, and with their boys and girls, the cotton pickers would move on to some other part of the country which needed their hands and their heads. Of course, Janie wasn't thinking of all this while she sat on the steps of the schoolhouse. It was so much a part of her life that she didn't bother to think about it any more than she bothered to think about the processes of breathing when she drew fresh air into her lungs. For perhaps 10 minutes, Janie sat there, a blue, overalled figure of gloom, when all at once she caught a movement in the dust in front of her. It was so slight a movement that at first she thought her eyes were playing her tricks. But in the next second, the dust was again stirred, and then she was off the schoolhouse steps in one lunge. Flat on the ground, she hurled herself, one arm reaching out ahead of her. Suddenly, she drew in her arm, her hand tightly closed, and gathered herself up. From head to foot, she was coated with fine dirt, but she didn't care. She didn't even stop to brush herself off before she slowly began to open her fingers, squinting closely at what she held there. A smile widened across her face, for in the shadowy hollow of her palm was a small horned toad. Its eyes, mere pinheads of glistening black, stared fiercely at her, and its chinless mouth was set grimly. But Janie was not alarmed. She had captured many horned toads before this, and knew that for all their fierce expression and spiky coverings, they were quite harmless creatures. Slowly she lowered herself onto the schoolhouse steps once more to inspect her captive. To most people, he would have appeared far more beautiful, but to Janie, he seemed an object of delight. Far from beautiful, but to Janie, he seemed an object of delight. His 4 tiny feet with their minute claws were perfect, and from the fringe of miniature scales outlining what should have been his chain to the last infinitesimal spike on the end of his brief tail, he was finished and complete. Janie loved him at once and began cautiously to draw her finger across his hard little head. Suddenly, an idea occurred to her. She would use this horned toad to test the new teacher. In every school she'd ever been, someone had always solemnly assured her whenever she happened to mention a horned toad that she should call them horned lizards, for they were not really toads at all. Janie had always been entirely willing to accept the fact that they were not, strictly speaking, horned toads, but to call them anything else just wasn't possible. The minute you said horned lizard, you turned a perfectly good horned toad into a new and unattractive animal. She would loathe having anyone refer to her new pet as a horned lizard, and if the new teacher did so, Janie's respect for her as a human being would be completely shattered. It would be, she thought, like saying, "It is I," instead of "it's me." If you used the former, you'd be correct, but you wouldn't be a friend. She was determined to discover whether her new teacher was a friend or merely correct. She and the horned toad had not long to wait. Janie had hardly got some of the dirt brushed off when a dusty sedan rolled to a halt in the shade of the schoolhouse, and a fat and smiling woman got out of it. Janie felt hopeful. "Hello," called the woman. "No 10 o'clock scholar about you, is there?" Janie felt increasingly hopeful as she rose to meet this stranger who was undoubtedly her teacher, the teacher. Surely no one who quoted Mother Goose to you before she had asked your name would call a horned toad a horned lizard. More than that, she would know what to do with you if you were good in reading and poor in arithmetic. Suddenly the whole tone of the day was changed, but the final test was yet to come. "Look," said Janie, holding out her captive. "Well, bless my soul," said the woman heartily, bending over Janie's hand. "A horned toad! Did you catch it?" Janie nodded, too delighted for the moment to speak. Then, "But I haven't named him yet." "Can't let him go without a name. Let's see." The woman thought a moment. Then, "I have it. Let's call him Fafnir. He was a first-class dragon when giants ruled the earth. And this fellow looks a lot like a dragon, a fairy dragon. Does Fanfur appeal to you?" Janie nodded. The teacher chuckled. "I suppose the proper thing would be to let the horned toad decide such an important matter for himself. But from the look of him, I should say that he wasn't quite on speaking terms with us yet." She looked at Janie with eyes that were merry and direct, trustworthy eyes and friendly secrets in their depths. "I'm Miss Peterson," she said. "I'm Janie Larkin." A stout arm encircled Janie's narrow shoulders, and for a brief moment she felt herself squeezed against Mrs. Peterson's arm and her well-cushioned side. "Welcome to Camp Miller School, Janie. Come on inside. We'll start the day together." No questions, no fussing, just come on in, as if she had known you always. Janie slid an arm around Miss Peterson's ample waist, and together they entered the building, the small girl walking on tiptoe, to her teacher's secret amusement. Miss Peterson would have been surprised to know she was the innocent cause of that strange behavior, for Janie was thrilling to the certainty that this very morning, unexpectedly and alone, she had discovered the most wonderful teacher in the world. That was enough to make anyone prance on tiptoe. A few minutes ago, she had been feeling sorry for herself, and all the time there had been Fanfare and Miss Peterson. Not even Lupe, going to the regular school, could possibly have enjoyed such luck as that. During the next half hour, Janie helped Miss Peterson prepare for the day's work. She cleaned the backboards and put the tables and benches in order. Some pink petunias were blooming in a window box, and Janie watered them from the standing pipe outside the door. Then she picked off the withered blossoms, which left her fingers so sticky she had to return to the water pipe to wash her hands. Soon the boys and the girls began to arrive. The school day started at 9 o'clock, when one of the boys carried the flag out to the unpainted pole and fastened it to the rope neatly secured there. While the whole school stood grouped at attention, the flag was drawn slowly up into the morning sky, until at last it came to rest at the pole's very top, and the stars and stripes were unfolded above the school and the camp. The little ceremony ended, and they all trooped to their lessons. As for the morning advance, Janie's regard for Miss Peterson increased, if that was possible. Because they were crowded on the benches, and because their legs were not all long enough to reach the floor, she saw to it that the children were given time to move around and rest. And it seemed to be the custom for 2 or 3 of the children to tell the others each day which part of the country they had thought the most interesting in their traveling around. Janie, listening to the others this morning, decided, when her turn came, to tell about the place by the river which she had discovered the other day, the place like the Willow plate. And that's the end of the story. So now you guys can do this with answer your packets, okay?